Hey everybody! Today we're going to talk about composition. Now, composition is one of the most important aspects of creating a work of art. It basically means how you're going to arrange the elements in a work of art to direct the eye of the viewer. Most often, a strong composition directs the viewer's eye to a focal point. A focal point is an element of an artwork that is emphasized by the artist to attract the viewer's attention. Now, here are some attributes that can add emphasis to a focal point. Our brains prioritize elements that are near the center of a composition, which is placement. We notice things that are different from their surroundings, which is contrast. We notice things that are more intricate, which is detail. We notice when similar shapes are gathered together, which is grouping, and we are drawn to larger visual elements, which is scale. Let's see all these attributes in action. Here's a work by Takashi Murakami. We can see that the large, menacing creature at the center is the obvious focal point. So what are the attributes that Murakami uses to make that the focal point? Can you see that he's used placement by putting that form in the center of the image? He's also used contrast. The focal point is the only area where we see that saturated red and the sharp, angular lines of the teeth. Detail is employed because the focal point has way more detail than the textured background, and he uses grouping by echoing the focal point with similar circular forms. Lastly, he employs scale by making the face the largest element in the composition. So Murakami uses all of these attributes of emphasis, but it's not necessary for him to do so. Let's take a look at this work by Gustav Klimt. The focal point is the woman's face. You can see that he has not used placement, as the face is up towards the edge of the canvas. He has, though, used contrast, as the pale, flat tones of the skin contrast the intricate patterning of the rest of the work. He has not used detail. There is consistent detail throughout the whole of the image. He has used grouping, as he has repeated flat, white shapes around the face with the hands and the triangles in the upper dress area. And he has used scale, as the face and chest are some of the largest shapes in the composition. So Gustav Klimt doesn't use all the attributes, but he does need to make sure that he uses more of those attributes of emphasis in his focal point than in any other area, or he risks other areas attracting more attention. So let's check out this image by Banksy. His focal point is the figures in the foreground. He uses placement because the figures are near the center, and contrast because the color is only used on the figures. Detail isn't a factor because the detail is consistent throughout the work, but grouping is because there is a repetition of colored elements in the figure group. You can see the plane is an element that could compete for emphasis because it has scale and placement working for it, but because the figures have placement, contrast, and grouping, they win the battle for emphasis in a score of 3-2. Now that we know how to make a focal point, where should we put it? Well, a good thing to think about is the rule of thirds. You don't always have to use it, but it's not a bad idea to do so. The intersecting lines at the rule of thirds are great places to put focal points. If you put your focal point directly in the center, the viewer's mind will subconsciously desire symmetry and be uncomfortable if you, the artist, don't provide it. And if you place your focal point too far to the edge, the viewer might be compelled out of the edge of your picture plane and end up just looking at the wall, or worse yet, the image hanging next to yours. You can see in the Chardin painting above how there are numerous examples of aligning objects with the rule of thirds. The top of the jug aligns with the top horizontal line and sits butted up to the vertical line. Even the top of the funny little pot on the far left side sits on the bottom horizontal line. Now, your cell phone camera has the rule of thirds lines as a feature you can turn on and off. Your digital camera probably has a viewfinder function built in, often called grid. It overlays the rule of thirds over your image. Just align important compositional elements along these lines or their intersections, and voila! Instant composition. The other thing you want to consider in creating your composition is to add variety. Make sure your composition is captivating and dynamic by adding a variety of shapes and textures to hold your viewer's attention. If an image is too simple, it risks becoming predictable and easy to ignore. Another great tool is to use visual elements in your work as if they were lines and shapes to create movement and direct the viewer throughout the work. Here you can see Mary Cassatt has used nearly every element of this composition to point the viewer's eyes to the focal point, that is the mother and child. No matter where we, the viewer, look, Cassatt has placed elements that push our eyes back to that focal point. And the last thing you want to think about is overlapping elements in your composition. Compare these two images of shoes. See how much more dynamic the composition is where the images overlap? Your eyes move effortlessly from one shoe to the other, whereas the other seems scattered and static. Now let's look back at the attributes of emphasis. I want you to take a moment and look at this painting by